Hello again everybody, and welcome to video number 25 of my Linux Commands for Beginners series. And in this video I'm going to go over several commands that you can use to view used and unused resources on your Linux system. So these commands are definitely very important to know. So the first of the three commands that I'm going to go over is the df command, which stands for disk free. So if you just type df and press enter, what you'll see is a list of mount points on your file system and the available and used space of each. But you might be looking at this and say, wow, I can't really understand exactly what that means. Well, thankfully there's the -H option, which is for human readable. So if we do that instead, you'll see that it's actually much easier to understand because you have everything in megabytes, gigabytes, kilobytes, and so on. So here's how to read the information that you see on my video. So basically you see the mount points here on the right. The root partition is always mounted on a single // and you can see that my root partition is 29 gigabytes. Of that 29 gigabytes, I'm using 4.9. and that means that I have 22 gigabytes free. But if you look down further, you see that I actually have my my home partition on its own partition, and you can see that my home partition, I have 191 gigabytes allocated for it, and I have 108 gigabytes used and 74 gigabytes free. And that means I have 60% of my space available. Now here you see that I also have home jlacroix.private, and this line here is the same as the line above it, and the only reason why you're seeing that is because I have an encrypted home partition or home directory. So you may or may not see that. You'd only see that if you actually had your home directory encrypted. But anyway, you could pretty much ignore all these other file systems like tempfs and all these others. Basically, all the partitions that you allocated when you set up your Linux system, you know what partitions you have set up. So I know that I have a root partition and I have a home partition here. So you can see the output right away, and I think that kind of makes sense. So moving on from here is the du command. The du command tells you how much space a particular folder is. So if I run it just right in my home directory, du, and press enter, now you can see that my home directory, or my current directory that I'm working in, is taking up this much space, but that doesn't seem very readable, does it? So the -H command works here as well. du space -H. Enter. And of course you see here I'm using 108 gigabytes of space, and of course it has to scroll through everything just to show you that. But if you just basically wanted a summary only and you didn't want to scroll through all of that, just type du-s for summary, and then also append the H for human readable as well. Press enter, and it only shows you basically how much space that you're using, and it doesn't scroll through everything all at once. So that's the du command. And another thing about the du command is you don't have to run it in your current working directory. You can actually run it against another directory if you wanted to. So for example, du-sh, just like we did before, but this time let's type /etc and press enter, and we can see my Etsy folder is using 29 megabytes. Now ignore these here. Basically there might be a few folders that I might not have permission to access. I could have just used sudo against that, and you know, it's not going to change much, honestly. 29 megabytes was a good estimate anyway, but you can see that my Etsy folder on my file system is using 29 megabytes. That's not bad. So you could practice this command against other directories to see how much space they are using. So that could definitely be a useful command that you should know. And finally, another command that you should know is the free command. Just type free and press enter, and it basically shows you how much memory, RAM on your system is being used and how much is free. But that doesn't seem very readable, does it? Well, just like the other two commands, the free command has some flags that we can put at the end that'll make things a little bit easier to understand. So for example, free-m shows everything in megabytes, and I think that makes a lot more sense. You can see here that I have almost 16 gigabytes of RAM on this system, the kernel reserves some memory for itself, so the amount of memory total that you see will always be a little bit less than the amount of memory that you actually have. So the kernel is using some memory, so it's leaving me with 15.9 gigabytes, which is still pretty darn good. And then you have some other sections here, used, free, and so on. And this can actually be very confusing. It is confusing for beginners, but to make it a little bit easier, what you're actually looking at, or should be looking at, is the line that says buffers and cache. So actually I have 1.3 gigabytes used, or 1300 megabytes used, and 14.6 roughly gigabytes that are free. So this is the line that you want to pay attention to. Now above here you might be wondering, well, what's used, free, and all that? Well, basically buffers and cache is, there's a kernel buffer, which is memory that's allocated or reserved for the kernel, and then there's memory that's reserved for your disk cache. So basically input and output on your disk will usually go through your buffers first before it's actually written, and the kernel wants some memory just keep around just for its own use. But don't let that scare you though, because in your system you might have like a little bit of memory free and not all that much. But that's okay, because the two columns here, buffers and cache, these can actually be given to any program that asks for it. So if your memory starts to get kind of low, then both buffers and cache will easily and welcomely give up their memory for applications use whenever an application needs it. So applications take priority. So if an application needs it, then it can definitely take from either of these columns. But to keep things a little bit easier to understand, the best advice is just to pay attention to this line that says buffers cache. And basically what you're seeing is that after the kernel reserves its memory, I have 15.9 gigabytes, or 15,932 megabytes that are physically available, and of that 1,300 megabytes are being used, and 14,632 or 14.6 gigabytes are free. So I have a few websites that I'll leave you with, and I'll put them in the video, because every time I try to put links in my comments, I'm always blocked from doing so for some reason. But anyway, the first site is Linux8myram.com. That's probably the easiest address to remember, I would say. And you'll know you're on the right site if you have a screen that looks like this. Linux 8myram, and you got this cool little stick figure and an evil penguin eating a stick of RAM. But actually, if you scroll down, this site will actually explain how everything is laid out when you're using the free command, and this is recommended reading for you if this is something that you want to know more about. And also, I'm going to give you another website, as if one wasn't bad enough, but this address isn't all that easy, so you could pause the video if you need to jot this one down. And here's the address. Again, pause the video if you need to. And this is also a useful site that I found while just Googling around, and it basically just reiterates everything that I said, but it gives you a little bit more detail, because it gives you this neat little table here that explains the free command and how it shows resources that are used and resources that are free and so on. So here's a quick review, you guys. I know we went over a lot in this video, so I'm going to do a quick review. So we went through the df command, and -H makes it human readable, and basically df-H shows you how much hard drive space is free on your Linux file system. And you can see here of importance, I have a root partition and a home partition, and with this command I can easily see how much space is allocated for the partition, how much space of that is used, and how much of that is free. And we also went over the du command, and it's easier to use du-sh in my opinion, which if you run it without any argument, like which folder you want to run it against, it just shows you in the current working directory. And sometimes you have things that are owned by root, so you can use the sudo command in front of it to get rid of this part here. But basically you see 108 gigabytes, and again du-sh can be run against other folders, So if you want to see how much space a particular folder is using, then you could easily do that. For example, if I wanted to see, whoops, I can't type today, sorry, how much space my music collection is taking, you can see from the output that my music collection is taking 36 gigabytes, and so on. And then we also went over the free command, free-m, shows you everything in megabytes. You could also do free-g for gigabytes, but that's a little harder to read, I think. So I always stick to free-m, which is megabytes. And that shows you how much space, or excuse me, how much of your RAM is available and how much is being used. And again, go look at this line here. Yeah, I have 15 gigs or 15.9 gigs that I have physically, and then used I have 1358, used, and then 14574 free. And that's, again, since we use the -m, that's in megabytes. And finally, I'm going to give you the websites one more time if you need to read more about how to tell the difference between cached memory and whatnot. This is a good website here that I found while I was Googling. And then you also have the infamous linux8myram.com, which I don't think you'll have any trouble remembering. So again, if you need to use the pause feature of the video to write this down or copy it down, that's fine. Anyway, that's a little introduction to viewing used and free resources on your Linux file system. I hope this helps you. I hope it doesn't confuse you too much, but I think that was a general enough explanation. So I hope that was of value to you. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel.